Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. It's important we mark where we stood when we first heard this. The idea is simple. If Azathoth wakes up, it's not what you've been told. But that sentence carries more weight than most realize. It doesn't point to destruction. It points to something deeper, stranger, and far more unsettling. The quiet unraveling of meaning itself. Azathoth isn't just a figure in Lovecraft's mythos. It sits at the center of a literary and philosophical tradition that questions the very structure of reality. First named in a fragment written around 1922, Azathoth became a symbol for chaos without purpose, a god who dreams the universe into being without knowing it. If that dream ends, it is not fire or ruin that follows. It is silence. This investigation won't chase jump scares or monsters. It will follow texts, letters, and cultural echoes. We'll examine how a single name, Azathoth, came to suggest the most dangerous idea in cosmic horror, that everything we know is only a side effect of something unconscious. You've already heard the name. That may be enough to change how you see everything that comes next. Let's begin. Azathoth first appears not in grandeur, but in fragments. A single-page prose sketch titled Azathoth, written around 1922, offers no plot, only mood. Lovecraft described it as the beginning of a longer story that would never be completed. It begins not with a name, but a whisper. When age fell upon the world, and wonder went out of the minds of men. This fragment tells us everything we need to know. Azathoth was never meant to be a monster. It was meant to be a condition, the loss of wonder, the rise of rationalism, the crumbling of mythic frameworks. These are not backdrops. They are Azathoth. It is not simply a being Lovecraft feared. It is the conceptual shape of a universe that no longer needs gods, meaning, or memory. By the early 1920s, Lovecraft's own worldview had shifted. No longer interested in traditional Gothic horror, he turned his attention to cosmic insignificance. This wasn't a thematic choice. It was philosophical. Influenced by the writings of Bertrand Russell and the implications of Einstein's general relativity, Lovecraft began to see human consciousness as a fragile bubble adrift in chaos. The dreamer at the center, Azathoth, represented that chaos, not as malevolent, but as fundamentally indifferent. In a 1927 letter to Frank Belknap Long, Lovecraft referred to Azathoth as the monstrous nuclear chaos beyond angled space. Importantly, he included no moral weight. Chaos here is a statement of fact, not judgment. This framing matters. Azathoth emerges in Lovecraft's fiction just as the 20th century begins dismantling older cosmologies. Newton's orderly universe gave way to relativity, non-Euclidean geometry, and the disquieting implications of quantum physics. The idea of a universe built on reason was no longer certain. In this cultural moment, Azathoth appears not as a destroyer, but as the truth hidden behind appearances. The early 20th century did not need a devil. It needed something worse, an uncaring mechanism still running long after anyone remembered why. Consider this carefully. Azathoth is not described as intelligent or even aware. Lovecraft calls it blind and idiot, terms deliberately chosen to repel anthropomorphic interpretation. It cannot be appeased, predicted, or known. Its court, attended by mindless flute players, evokes rituals without content, ceremony without meaning. We are not meant to understand Azathoth. We are meant to confront the terrifying possibility that there is nothing to understand. This is not a failure of knowledge. It is knowledge's terminal edge. If there is a theology here, it is accidental. Lovecraft never returned to Azathoth directly, but the concept lingers in other works. In The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, 1926-27, Randolph Carter's cosmic journey ends with a single, final warning: seek not to awaken the blind idiot god. But even here, Azathoth remains off stage. The horror lies in approaching it, not in what it does. This structure is deliberate. Lovecraft designs Azathoth as a literary black hole, impossible to depict directly, yet exerting gravitational force on every narrative that surrounds it. This is not metaphorical flair. It is strategy. By withholding Azathoth, Lovecraft gives it epistemic weight. That which cannot be shown must be imagined, and imagination, when stretched too far, breaks. The lack of a definitive story about Azathoth is not a gap in the mythos. It is its spine. Unlike Cthulhu, who sleeps in R'lyeh and can rise again, Azathoth has no narrative arc. It is always present, always sleeping, always central. What changes is not it, but our awareness of it. The danger is not that it will wake, but that we might realize we are already inside its dream. This reframes horror, not an approaching event, but an ongoing condition we failed to recognize. We must pause here. This absence of direct narrative signals a shift from character to concept, from myth to metaphor. Azathoth marks a new kind of horror, not the presence of evil, but the collapse of meaning. In the next section, we'll examine the deeper philosophical roots that allowed such a concept to emerge, not as fantasy, but as a logical response to a world increasingly stripped of certainty. Azathoth is not an isolated invention. Its conceptual DNA draws from multiple philosophical traditions and cultural anxieties, many of which long predate Lovecraft. Though he claimed to reject religion and mysticism, his work is steeped in their afterimages. Azathoth, in particular, emerges from the ruins of theological and metaphysical systems that once promised meaning. Its power lies not in originality, but in reversal. What was once divine becomes idiotic. What was once conscious becomes unconscious. What was once moral becomes mechanistic. We begin with the monotheistic Godhead, creator, sustainer, and knower of all. Azathoth takes this role and hollows it out. He is central to the universe, yes, but unknowing. He creates, but without will. He sustains, but without design. There is no logos, no moral structure, no covenant. In this, Azathoth closely mirrors the Gnostic demiurge, the malformed architect of the material world, ignorant of the higher truths. But Azathoth takes it further. The demiurge still believes he is God. Azathoth doesn't believe anything. It is unaware even of itself. This is not malicious creation. It is accidental emanation, a dream whose source cannot wake because it never meant to sleep. Eastern thought offers another frame. In Hindu cosmology, Brahman dreams the universe into being, its illusionary form known as Maya. Azathoth echoes this, but with one vital difference. In Hindu tradition, awakening from the dream leads to enlightenment. In Lovecraft's formulation, awakening leads to nothing. There is no true reality behind the illusion, only noise. Similarly, Buddhist notions of sunyata, emptiness, are stripped of their spiritual grounding and reconfigured into dread. Azathoth is not the liberating void. It is the suffocating absence of coherence, not transcendence, but erasure. We must also consider the Enlightenment, specifically its disintegration. Lovecraft inherited a world that had grown suspicious of reason. After World War I, the faith in progress, order, and rationality began to collapse. The horrors of mechanized warfare and the rise of nihilistic philosophy, Nietzsche's death of God, Schopenhauer's cosmic pessimism, cast long shadows. Azathoth becomes a perfect expression of this intellectual climate. The central truth is not divinely ordered, but violently absurd. To know the universe is to know there is no why. Philosophically, Azathoth aligns with a concept rarely discussed in horror: epistemic exhaustion. This is the moment when traditional categories, good and evil, order and chaos, subject and object, cease to function. Lovecraft doesn't just depict madness as personal breakdown. He hints at something larger, the failure of cognition itself. Azathoth is what lies beyond the edge of knowability. It is not the opposite of knowledge. It is what remains when knowledge breaks down into disconnected signals. Literary influences also feed into Azathoth's conceptual core. Lord Dunsany's gods sleep in deep time, waiting, but they remain anthropomorphic. Lovecraft removes the human entirely. In Poe, we find dreams of collapse and symbolic madness, but always within human boundaries. Lovecraft erases those boundaries. Azathoth has no face, no intention, no agency. It belongs to the tradition of Milton's chaos, yet even Milton's primordial abyss had a kind of logic. Azathoth has only directionless, nuclear motion. Consider that word, nuclear. In the 1920s, it meant the center, but in the 20th century, it also came to mean annihilation. The cultural impact of these reversals cannot be overstated. Azathoth is terrifying because it mirrors the reader's slow disillusionment. We look to the center of things, our beliefs, our sciences, our gods, and find instead a blind idiot humming in darkness. This isn't the end of a story. It's the start of one we didn't know we were already in. If the cosmos has no center of sense, then every conclusion we've drawn may be nothing more than narrative debris within someone else's unfinished thought. We now see how Azathoth is not an anomaly, but a synthesis. It fuses ancient theological inversions, Eastern metaphysical structures, and modern disillusionment. Its horror lies in implication. If Azathoth is real, then everything else isn't. Next, we turn to language, the tool we use to make sense of that which resists it. What can a name like Azathoth reveal when meaning itself is in question? Azathoth's name resists translation. It offers no clear meaning, no linguistic anchor, no internal logic. And that, precisely, is the point. Lovecraft understood that names shape perception. Names stabilize the unknown. By inventing a name that evokes depth without yielding to definition, he created a word that functions like the thing it describes: formless, irrational, centerless. Azathoth is a name designed to sound like meaning while withholding it. Phonetically, Azathoth blends familiar mythic fragments. Aza, echoing Azazel, a demon of abandonment. Thoth, evoking the Egyptian god of wisdom and writing. Yet neither root defines the whole. Instead, the name destabilizes. It gestures toward the religious and the ancient, while refusing to belong to either tradition. This isn't accidental. Lovecraft frequently embedded resonant syllables into his invented languages, not for translation, but for tonal suggestion. Azathoth vibrates with implied significance, like a broken cipher. It's not nonsense, it's post-sense. This linguistic ambiguity mirrors the myth's function. In traditional theology, a god's name is a key to invocation. But Azathoth's name does not grant access. It denies it. Its untranslatability is its power. To name Azathoth is not to summon, but to recognize that you are already inside the structure it names. The utterance becomes diagnostic, not magical. You say it not to awaken the god, but to realize it never slept. We must pause here. Consider how language operates in the broader mythos. Lovecraft often portrays human languages as insufficient for describing cosmic truths. The Necronomicon is written in forbidden tongues. Cults chant in syllables that deform the mouth. These choices are not stylistic flourishes. They are signals. When the real nature of reality breaks through, it does so as linguistic failure. Azathoth is not only unnameable, it renders naming itself meaningless. This brings us to symbolic paradox. Lovecraft famously calls Azathoth the blind idiot god at the center of all things. Each word in that phrase contradicts expectation. God suggests will and agency. Blind negates perception. Idiot implies unthinking. And yet this contradiction is the definition. Azathoth is not X or Y. It is X and the impossibility of Y. Language collapses under the weight of what it tries to contain. The phrase functions like a koan, not to inform, but to break the habit of comprehension. Visual and sonic symbolism reinforce this collapse. At Azathoth's court, mindless flute players pipe endlessly. Music becomes noise. Ceremony becomes aimless repetition. The sacred turns absurd. In many traditions, music orders the cosmos. The spheres sing, chants align spirit with divine harmony. Here, the flute shrieks into a vacuum. These symbols are not corrupted. They are emptied. Their forms persist, but without meaning. Just as the name Azathoth persists, pronounced by readers, whispered by cultists, but never understood, this use of symbolic language builds an atmosphere of what we might call anti-semantics, the sense that every signifier leads further from what it tries to name. Azathoth becomes a sinkhole in language, a gravitational center of conceptual entropy. This strategy isn't unique to Lovecraft. It finds precedent in apophatic theology, the tradition of defining God by what it is not, and literary absurdism. But Lovecraft radicalizes it. The unknowable becomes not holy, but hostile to sense itself. We now face a literary entity whose very name infects structure. Azathoth is a linguistic virus that reminds us the map is not the territory, and sometimes the map erases the territory entirely. What does this imply for narrative itself? If meaning fails at the level of language, how can story survive? We'll explore this in the next section, where myth building meets epistemic sabotage. Lovecraft didn't invent myths. He constructed them. Azathoth, unlike traditional characters, is not built through story arcs or dialogue. It emerges through absence, implication, and careful narrative layering. Its authenticity is not derived from detail, but from distance. In mythic terms, Azathoth operates like a black box, referenced, alluded to, never explained. This mirrors the techniques of ancient religious texts, where the holiest figures are defined by what cannot be said. In the dream quest of unknown Kadath, Azathoth appears only at the end of a long journey, and even then, only by description. The protagonist, Randolph Carter, is warned never to seek the central throne where Azathoth dwells. The god itself never speaks, acts, or moves. It simply is. This passive omnipresence mimics the narrative role of the divine in apocalyptic literature, positioned outside time, unreachable, and lethal to those who get too close. But Lovecraft subverts the purpose. This is not a god of judgment or salvation. It is a presence so vacant that approaching it leads not to truth, but to total narrative collapse. We must look closely at how Lovecraft designs this collapse. His stories referencing Azathoth are fragmented, dreamlike, often incomplete. Azathoth, 1922, is only a page long. The dream quest is structured as a descent into symbolic non-reality. The dreams in the witch house and the haunter of the dark include references to Azathoth as a distant central force, yet provide no concrete interaction. This isn't an oversight, it's method. Lovecraft uses what scholars call narrative negative space, a deliberate omission that suggests the shape of something too vast to render. Azathoth is never described fully because it cannot be. Compare this to how religious myths establish authority. In Scripture, authenticity is reinforced by lineage, divine encounter, or moral instruction. Lovecraft reverses this. The mythos gains credibility precisely because it refuses such structures. The Necronomicon, for instance, is a text without origin or consistent content. Its danger lies in its ability to erode consensus reality. Similarly, Azathoth's authenticity is constructed through rumor, contradiction, and secondhand citation. These techniques mimic the way real-world esoteric traditions operate, through hidden knowledge, forbidden fragments, and unverifiable claims. Importantly, Lovecraft positions Azathoth at the ontological center of his invented cosmos. It is not a peripheral threat, it is the source. This echoes older cosmologies, particularly in medieval models where the cosmos revolves around a fixed center. But here, that center is not divine light. It is blind, seething chaos. This inversion turns the structure of reality itself into a threat. If everything orbits Azathoth, then every law of nature, every concept of time, every structure of thought becomes suspect. The myth gains weight not by asserting truth, but by destabilizing the conditions of truth altogether. This literary strategy produces what might be called authentic unease. The reader is not frightened by what Azathoth does, but by what its existence implies, that the universe may not have been designed or even noticed. Myth, in this context, is not a system of shared belief. It is the residue of failed attempts to make sense of something fundamentally without sense. Lovecraft's genius was to present this not as absence, but as architecture. His cosmos is richly structured, but the structure leads nowhere. The implications are clear. If Azathoth represents a real possibility within Lovecraft's constructed universe, then the act of storytelling itself becomes unstable. What does it mean to narrate, to explain, to order events, if the center of all things is incoherent? We now move from myth to meaning. In the next section, we'll examine the core philosophical themes that make Azathoth not only horrifying, but conceptually inescapable. Azathoth embodies a trinity of destabilizing concepts: insignificance, entropy, and dream reality that sit at the heart of cosmic horror. These aren't narrative themes, they're philosophical structures. Lovecraft doesn't simply suggest that humans are small. He builds entire metaphysical systems to show that human significance is a comforting lie. Azathoth is not a villain, it is a demonstration. If reality has no center of meaning, then everything collapses inward. Language, morality, even thought itself. Insignificance in this framework is not personal, it is ontological. Lovecraft once wrote, "All my tales are based on the fundamental premise that common human laws and interests and emotions have no validity or significance in the vast cosmos at large." Azathoth becomes the proof of that premise. It is positioned at the universe's center, and yet it knows nothing. Its centrality mocks human ego. In earlier myths, what lies at the center is sacred. Here, the center is empty, not morally evil, but radically indifferent. This inversion is not thematic decoration. It is a philosophical verdict. Not only do humans not matter, but neither does anything else. This leads directly to entropy. In Lovecraft's usage, entropy is not merely thermodynamic, it is semantic. Structures decay, not just physically, but conceptually. Azathoth sits at the nucleus of this decay. The endless flute music that surrounds it is not melody, but disintegration, an acoustic metaphor for ordered systems losing shape. Consider that traditional cosmologies place a logos, reason or word, at the beginning. Azathoth replaces the logos with noise. The structure of meaning is no longer foundational, but already dissolving. Take the dreams in the witch house as illustration. Gilman's mathematical explorations reveal strange geometries that breach conventional space-time. These insights don't expand his understanding, they undo it. His mind begins to slip, not from fear, but from structural failure. What he perceives no longer aligns with cause, effect, or reason. This is entropy as epistemic collapse. And behind it all is the name Azathoth, whispered, implied, never grasped. That ambiguity is key. The closer one gets to Azathoth, the more meaning evaporates. Now we arrive at the most disturbing concept, dream reality. Lovecraft constructs a cosmos in which what we call reality is nothing more than a side effect of Azathoth's unconscious dreaming. Here, the horror is not that we might die, but that we were never real to begin with. In the dream quest of unknown Cthulhu, Randolph Carter's journey ends with the realization that all worlds, real and dreamt, are interconnected, but the center of them all is Azathoth. Not a place, but a condition. The implication is devastating. If Azathoth wakes, the dream ends, and with it, everything. But what does waking mean in this context? Lovecraft offers no clear answer, and that is intentional. Azathoth does not act, plan, or change. The waking is not an event, but a recognition. The moment we become aware of our dream state, the illusion collapses. This aligns with postmodern concerns. The idea that systems of knowledge, science, religion, narrative, are constructions, not truths. Azathoth becomes the personification of this collapse. Not the destroyer of worlds, but the invalidator of world-making itself. We must pause here. These concepts, insignificance, entropy, dream reality, do not stand alone. They interlock, forming a worldview in which no escape is possible. To see Azathoth is to understand that the cosmos is not ordered, not knowable, not even awake. And yet this vision continues to haunt literature, philosophy, and psychology, not because it shocks, but because it fits. In a universe without gods or guarantees, Azathoth offers something worse than death, context without coherence. Next, we turn to the forces and figures that surround this concept. Azathoth does not act alone. It pulses at the center of a pantheon, a system without system, whose participants are equally unknowable and equally essential to the dream's strange persistence. Azathoth is never alone. Though it lies at the center of Lovecraft's cosmology, it is surrounded by entities that mirror, reflect, or distort aspects of its nature. These figures are not lesser gods in a pantheon. They are not worshipped in hierarchical terms. Rather, they function as conceptual satellites, forces that maintain, distort, or translate Azathoth's dream into something survivable. Each is an aspect of unreality, an emissary of breakdown, or a paradoxical stabilizer of chaos. Begin with Nyarlathotep, perhaps the most linguistically active of Lovecraft's creations. While Azathoth dreams blindly, Nyarlathotep speaks. While Azathoth is shapeless, Nyarlathotep wears forms. Crucially, Nyarlathotep does not oppose Azathoth. It serves as its messenger. In the dream quest of unknown Kadath, it is said that Nyarlathotep is the soul and messenger of the outer gods. It does not interpret the dream, it enforces it. This figure inverts the role of Christ or Hermes. It brings revelation not to save, but to unmake. Its speech infects language. Its messages do not enlighten, they degrade understanding. Then there is Yog-Sothoth, often called the key and the gate. Yog-Sothoth exists outside of time, yet is coterminous with all of it. Unlike Azathoth, it is aware, but its awareness is inaccessible. In the Dunwich Horror, it is described as being one with all space and time. Yog-Sothoth may be Azathoth's dream, given form across dimensional boundaries. Or perhaps it is the record of the dream's permutations, a kind of cosmic memory. What it certainly is not, a coherent being. Readers often mistake Yog-Sothoth as a god of knowledge. This is a misreading. It represents the impossibility of knowledge without disintegration. Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, introduces another function: biological chaos. Often associated with uncontrolled reproduction and grotesque fertility, Shub-Niggurath may be the organic consequence of Azathoth's dream. If Azathoth produces disorder conceptually, Shub-Niggurath produces it materially. She is not creation, but overcreation, life without order or end. Her young are not offspring in a Darwinian sense. They are symbolic mutations, failures of categorization. The more you name them, the less they fit any known taxonomy. The flute players at Azathoth's court are often overlooked, but they play a central narrative role. They maintain the dream not by will, but by repetition. Their music is often described as thin, monotonous, or mindless. This evokes not ritual, but mechanism. They are not priests. They are fail-safes. The sound is not communication. It is containment. In this way, they resemble Lovecraft's larger strategy, continuous vibration to prevent awakening. The metaphor is elegant. Keep the narrative running, or the system collapses. We must also consider the beings of the dreamlands. These are not lesser versions of the outer gods, but occupants of a world within the dream. Their existence suggests layers, nested realities with differing levels of stability. The dreamlands often appear surreal but navigable. However, as one descends deeper, as Randolph Carter does, entities become increasingly formless, their logic increasingly dreamlike. Eventually, one reaches the court of Azathoth. This transition is not a journey through space. It is a degradation of symbolic cohesion. Together, these entities compose not a theology, but a structure of cognitive erosion. Each serves to destabilize a different axis of human understanding. Language, Nyarlathotep; time, Yog-Sothoth; biology, Shub-Niggurath; ritual, the flute players; perception, dreamlands, beings. They are not characters, they are allegorical mechanisms, unfolding parts of Azathoth's unconscious influence. Importantly, their relationships are never clearly defined. Lovecraft does not give us genealogies or hierarchies. This ambiguity is deliberate. It allows the reader to feel surrounded by systems too vast to map. The mythos resists systematization, not because it is lazy, but because it models a universe where systems themselves are illusions. Azathoth does not govern these entities. It does not command. It does not even know they exist. But they orbit its dream, like warped satellites around a black sun. They make the dream livable, for now. But the next question is inevitable. What happens when humans make contact with this structure? Do we interpret it, worship it, or break under it? The answer lies in the intersection of madness and perception. Human contact with the Azathothian structure rarely results in destruction. More often, it produces madness. But we must define this term carefully. In Lovecraft's work, madness is not hysteria or delusion. It is a logical consequence of encountering something incompatible with human cognition. Madness, in this context, functions not as breakdown, but as overload. The mind does not stop working. It continues, but in directions that no longer align with reality as others perceive it. This is illustrated with cruel clarity in The Dreams in the Witch House, 1932. The protagonist, Walter Gilman, is a student of advanced mathematics. His studies into non-Euclidean geometry lead him to experience dimensional shifts, dream incursions, and eventually the presence of Azathoth. What begins as intellectual exploration becomes perceptual distortion. But the key detail is this: Gilman does not lose his mind. He gains perceptions no human was meant to have. His madness is the result of expansion, not collapse. The more he sees, the less the world makes sense. This process is recursive. Madness begets perception, which in turn intensifies madness. Consider the character Robert Blake in The Haunter of the Dark, 1935. As Blake uncovers the history of the Church of Starry Wisdom, he becomes obsessed with a mysterious object, the shining trapezohedron, which serves as a kind of cosmic lens. Through it, he glimpses the Haunter, a being associated with Nyarlathotep, and, by extension, Azathoth. His mental state deteriorates not from fear, but from insight. His final diary entries are not rants. They are attempts to transcribe what cannot be contained in language. We must pause here. In Lovecraft, madness often replaces revelation. There is no hidden truth waiting to redeem the seeker. There is only unspeakable alignment with something deeper than sanity allows. The mad are not wrong. They are correct in ways the rest of us cannot survive. Their words, when coherent, often contain truths that normal minds cannot parse. Madness, then, becomes a form of truth too large to integrate. This is where the role of cults becomes significant. Cultists in Lovecraft's stories are not simple fanatics. They often appear calm, deliberate, organized. In The Call of Cthulhu, 1928, Inspector Legrasse's discovery of a Cthulhu cult reveals a network of people who do not believe in the gods. They align with them. This distinction matters. Their sanity is not broken. It is redirected. They serve a cosmic structure not because they understand it, but because they have accepted the futility of resisting it. In the case of Azathoth, cults are often depicted as insulators, those who act ritually to maintain the dream. Ritual, in this context, is not mystical. It is technical. The mad and the cultic act to preserve the dream state, not for power, but for stability. Their rites, their symbols, their incantations, these are not metaphors. They are cognitive scaffolding. They keep Azathoth asleep, not by suppressing it, but by maintaining the illusion that holds consensus reality in place. Without them, the dream phrase. Sanity, in this context, is collective denial. Madness is private awakening. This leads us to a chilling conclusion. Madness is not a malfunction. It is a side effect of perceiving things too clearly. Lovecraft's stories suggest that the closer one comes to Azathoth, the more one's mind loses its contextual anchors: time, causality, identity. These are not broken. They are revealed as arbitrary. Madness is the moment you realize the rules were never real. Next, we examine the most dangerous interface: knowledge itself. If madness is perception, then what happens when understanding catches up? We now turn to the collapse of epistemology, the moment when forbidden knowledge does not just change the knower, but undoes the act of knowing itself. Lovecraftian horror rarely concerns destruction in the traditional sense. The apocalypse, if it comes, will not arrive as fire or flood, but as knowledge. Azathoth, at the center of this vision, does not destroy the world. It renders the very act of understanding impossible. This is the final function of forbidden knowledge in Lovecraft's work, not revelation, but epistemic collapse, the failure of human systems to contain what they discover. In The Call of Cthulhu, the famous line, "The most merciful thing in the world is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents," is often quoted as thematic summary, but its deeper implication is epistemological. The horror is not that truth is hidden, it's that truth exists beyond the capacity of coherence. The danger is not in seeing too much, it's in trying to make sense of what's seen. Azathoth becomes the emblem of this principle, not a threat to life, but a threat to the possibility of knowing anything at all. Texts like the Necronomicon serve as literary devices to trigger this collapse. They are not evil books, they are containers of pattern-breaking information. Readers of the Necronomicon do not become possessed, they become unmoored. What they learn cannot be assimilated. Language falters. Thought becomes recursive, contradictory, or paralyzed. In this way, forbidden knowledge in Lovecraft's world functions not as content, but as a virus in the structure of understanding. Azathoth is not the subject of this knowledge. It is the condition that destroys the framework in which knowledge operates. Consider how this plays out structurally. Lovecraft rarely provides full explanations. Fragments, notes, cryptic phrases, these are not literary quirks. They simulate the incompleteness of understanding itself. The reader, like the protagonist, assembles pieces. But the more complete the picture becomes, the less stable the interpretation. In many cases, the whisperer in darkness, the shadow out of time, the final truths are not presented. They are approached, then withheld. That withholding is not to preserve suspense, it is to preserve sanity. We must pause here. Epistemic collapse is not simply ignorance. It is awareness that knowledge itself is broken. In this condition, reason continues to function, but returns incoherent results. Patterns appear, then contradict themselves. Categories dissolve. The observer begins to suspect that there is no external truth, only the echoes of a larger, dreaming disorder. Azathoth's role in this is not active, it is gravitational. Like a singularity, it bends every attempt at comprehension toward incoherence. Philosophically, this aligns with a kind of anti-Gnosticism. Traditional Gnostic systems posit a hidden truth behind the world, corrupted by material illusion. Lovecraft's cosmos contains no such hidden order. If there is a veil, it covers not secrets, but the fact that there is nothing coherent behind it. Azathoth does not conceal. It is the veil, the final revelation that there is no revelation. This concept resonates with modern philosophical pessimism. Thinkers like Thomas Ligotti and Eugene Thacker have extended Lovecraft's implications, that consciousness itself may be a kind of cosmic accident, and that meaning is a defense mechanism against perceptual collapse. In this reading, Azathoth is not a god, but a metaphor for the disintegration of the meaningful world. To wake, it is not to summon destruction. It is to realize that destruction has already occurred, long ago, when the first thinking being looked outward and saw only dark. Here the documentary shifts. The theme of forbidden knowledge will echo forward through literature and culture, but its original function, disintegration of epistemic trust, has already taken hold. The next section will trace how these concepts first entered fiction, how Lovecraft encoded them in story, and how Azathoth haunts the narrative forms that tried to contain it. Azathoth's first textual appearance is deceptively slight. The 1922 prose fragment titled Azathoth is fewer than 150 words, yet it plants the seed for a mythos that would ripple outward through decades of horror fiction. It begins not with exposition, but dislocation, when age fell upon the world and wonder went out of the minds of men. The narrator flees into dreams, not to escape, but to recover cosmic significance. Azathoth is named only at the end, a whispered presence in the ultimate void of chaos, where reigns the mindless demon sultan Azathoth. This passage does not describe an event. It sketches an ontological condition. The journey to Azathoth is not a plot. It is a transition from meaning to noise. This narrative function, Azathoth as endpoint rather than actor, recurs in later works. The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, 1926-27, features Azathoth in absence. Randolph Carter, traversing dream worlds in search of a lost city, is warned repeatedly not to approach the monstrous nuclear chaos beyond angled space. Though Carter ultimately turns back before reaching Azathoth, its gravitational pull shapes the entire narrative. The story's structure mimics the philosophical implications of its central god. The closer one comes to understanding, the more fragile reality becomes. Carter's final decision to return to his dream city rather than confront Azathoth is not a retreat, it is a refusal to dissolve. Lovecraft's use of Azathoth in the Dream Quest marks a significant evolution. No longer an isolated vision, Azathoth becomes the unseen axis of the Dreamlands. Unlike mythic gods who intervene in mortal affairs, Azathoth's power lies in its absence of agency. Its presence defines the limits of knowability. The court of flute players, thin, monotonous piping that echoed horribly through the ebony void, is not a place but a cognitive boundary. Beyond it, story cannot proceed. Azathoth's presence also permeates stories where it is never named. In The Call of Cthulhu, 1928, the titular entity is framed as a priest of the Great Old Ones, who wait to reclaim Earth. While Azathoth is not directly referenced, its influence is implicit. The green, sticky spawn of the stars serve a cosmic order that is hierarchical but directionless. Cthulhu dreams in Relia. Azathoth dreams the universe. The structural parallel is exact. Each god dreams, and their dreaming sustains reality. But where Cthulhu's dream is local, Azathoth's is total. We must pause here to consider The Whisperer in Darkness, 1930. Though primarily a tale of alien contact, it expands the cosmology with passing references to Yog-Sothoth and outside beings. The Mi-Go are collectors of brains, not to enslave them, but to preserve knowledge. Yet this preservation becomes ironic when one considers Azathoth as the hidden core. What is the point of collecting knowledge in a universe defined by incoherence? The Mi-Go may serve higher forces, but they do not comprehend them. This reinforces Lovecraft's central theme. Understanding is possible only within systems. Azathoth undoes systems. The Haunter of the Dark, 1935, one of Lovecraft's last stories, makes Azathoth's role explicit. The protagonist, Robert Blake, discovers a church once used by the Church of Starry Wisdom. Within it lies the shining trapezohedron, an object that serves as a portal to an unnamed outer god. In his final diary entry, Blake writes, "I see it, coming here, hell wind, Titan blur, black wings, Yog-Sothoth, save me, the three-lobed burning eye." Though Azathoth is not directly named, its signature is evident. The god beyond the trapezohedron is never seen. Its defining feature is sensory overload. Like Azathoth, it does not act. It annihilates coherence. In all these stories, Azathoth functions not as an antagonist, but as a structural endpoint. It is where narrative breaks. Characters who approach it suffer not death, but narrative erasure. Their motives disintegrate. Their voices become fragments. Their final words, often written, echo Lovecraft's preferred structure: incomplete sentences, trailing ellipses, unanswered questions. These are not literary gimmicks. They are formal enactments of Azathoth's conceptual function. Azathoth's early appearances and adjacent references reveal a deliberate evolution. It begins as a poetic symbol of chaos, becomes the silent core of dream logic, and finally manifests as the reason stories cannot finish. This arc aligns with Lovecraft's broader technique: to escalate horror not through escalation of threat, but through withdrawal of structure. In the next sections, we'll explore two major case studies, stories where Azathoth's influence becomes central, even when unseen. Together, they illustrate how narrative itself becomes the medium for cosmic horror. The Dreams in the Witch House, 1932, is one of the most direct literary interfaces between a human mind and the Azathothian structure. The story blends mathematical speculation, folklore, dream travel, and occult geometry, but beneath these motifs lies a deeper aim: to explore what happens when a mind crosses into the margins of Azathoth's dream. Unlike earlier tales where the cosmic core remains distant, here the proximity is tactile, persistent, and escalating. Walter Gilman, a mathematics student at Miskatonic University, rents a room in the ancient witch house. The building's crooked angles are said to warp space. Gilman's academic studies into non-Euclidean geometry and quantum mechanics begin to coincide with strange dreams: vast staircases in black gulfs, alien cities, and the presence of inhuman entities. Among them is a fleeting reference. He thought he heard a thin, monotonous piping from the distant reaches of the Gulf, where the demon Sultan Azathoth gnaws hungrily in chaos beyond time and space. This sentence appears only once. It is not explained, but its placement is surgical. It names the axis around which Gilman's sanity is slowly disassembled. The dreams Gilman experiences are not symbolic. They are structural inversions. Time and space lose continuity. He finds himself transported, often without memory of transition, into extra-dimensional environments. He converses with the witch Keziah Mason, who claims to have mastered curves and angles that allow one to escape the confines of Euclidean space. The implication is clear. Mathematics, ritual, and belief all point toward the same destination. Azathoth is not a myth. It is the inevitable conclusion of certain kinds of pattern recognition. We must pause here. Gilman's descent is not framed as moral failure or punishment. He does not summon these forces. He discovers them. This is a crucial difference from traditional horror. His madness is epistemological. Each step he takes into the multiverse is consistent with his intellectual training. In this way, the story becomes an indictment of knowledge without metaphysical grounding. The more Gilman understands, the less stable reality becomes. Azathoth is not his adversary, It is his terminal horizon. The architecture of the witch house becomes symbolic of this breakdown. Its unnatural angles are said to permit passage to other dimensions. But this passage is not spatial. It is cognitive. The house functions as a membrane, a place where logic thins. As Gilman's dreams bleed into waking life, the boundary between dimensions dissolves. He begins to experience time out of order, finds evidence of events he cannot remember, and ultimately becomes an instrument in a ritual he does not understand. Azathoth, as ever, remains off stage, but its influence saturates the structure. The dreams, the music, the impossibility of Euclidean containment, all point to a source that is not malevolent, but beyond context. The horror is not that Azathoth intervenes. The horror is that it doesn't need to. Its dreaming is enough to warp minds, alter physics, and collapse narrative consistency. Gilman's eventual death is not closure. It is a symptom. His final night is witnessed through fragmented clues. Blood, strange marks, missing time. No explanation is offered. The narrative, like Gilman's mind, terminates in fragments. In literary terms, The Dreams in the Witch House marks a maturation of Lovecraft's treatment of Azathoth. Where the dream quest explored philosophical distance, this story explores psychological proximity. Azathoth's presence requires no summoning. It is an ambient condition, a sleeping truth one might stumble upon through mathematics, dreams, or architecture. Gilman's story is not about a human confronting the divine. It is about a mind cracking under the realization that reality itself is a byproduct of something unconscious and uncaring. This story expands Azathoth's narrative role, from cosmological background to psychological engine. It sets the stage for further explorations of characters undone not by violence, but by contact with the outer logic of Azathoth's dream. In the next case study, we'll examine The Haunter of the Dark, where Lovecraft builds a final confrontation not with the god itself, but with one of its emissaries, an echo that still annihilates. The Haunter of the Dark, 1935, represents Lovecraft's final solo work of fiction, and it functions as a compact embodiment of his mature cosmic horror. Though Azathoth never appears directly, its presence is unmistakable, lingering just behind language, implied in geometry, invoked through a final vision. The story focuses on Robert Blake, a writer and occult researcher who becomes obsessed with a ruined church in Providence, once used by the heretical Church of Starry Wisdom. Within the church lies a relic known as the Shining Trapezohedron, a window to something unspeakable. That something, while named only obliquely, is unmistakably linked to Azathoth's court. Blake's fascination with the trapezohedron begins as intellectual curiosity, but quickly deepens into obsession. When he gazes into it, he does not receive knowledge, he receives contact. The being he calls the Haunter of the Dark becomes aware of him, responding only when conditions permit, specifically during power outages that allow it to move through darkness. Though the Haunter is described in physical terms, wings, a three-lobed burning eye, these descriptors resist concreteness. They are symbolic ruptures. In Lovecraft's language, eye never means perception. It means unfiltered presence. What matters is not what the Haunter does, but what it represents. It is explicitly linked to Nyarlathotep, the messenger of the outer gods. In Lovecraft's mythos, Nyarlathotep alone among the outer gods takes shape, speaks, and acts with malice. But his malice is subordinate to his function, to mediate Azathoth's dream into forms that shatter the human mind. The haunter is a localized aspect of that mediation. Its role is not destruction, it is transmission. When Blake dies, he does not explode, vanish, or scream. He leaves behind cryptic diary entries and a final burst of terrified insight. I see it, coming here, hell wind, Titan blur, black wings, Azathoth, save me, the three-lobed burning eye. This trailing sentence is not closure, it is structural breakdown. Narrative grammar fails. The mind cannot sustain the experience. Even the language, hell wind, Titan blur, is abstract, not descriptive. It mimics the form of revelation while withholding the content. This is precisely how Azathoth operates, not as an entity, but as a force that disables context. The Church of Starry Wisdom adds another layer. Its members did not worship in the traditional sense. They channeled. Their rituals were aimed at creating alignment between human minds and the incomprehensible forces behind reality. Like the cults in the Call of Cthulhu, they are not mad in the usual way. They are resigned. Their texts, objects, and invocations serve to thin the membrane between dimensions, not to gain power, but to affirm that there is no salvation, only contact. We must pause here. Blake's journey mirrors earlier protagonists like Gilman and Carter, but with one key difference. Blake never attempts to master what he finds. He doesn't study the trapezohedron to use it. He's simply unable to look away. This passivity marks a late-stage Lovecraftian protagonist, one who understands too late that discovery is not linear. One gaze is enough. The pattern enters. The end begins. Azathoth's signature in this story is architectural. The church, with its spire, black and grotesque against the sky, is a relic of suppressed history. Its shape distorts perspective. Inside it, geometry fails. The windows, floors, and staircases echo the same non-Euclidean violations seen in the dreams in the witch house. The implication is subtle but firm. Wherever architecture bends in unnatural ways, Azathoth's influence has seeped through. It does not move, it radiates. The haunter of the dark is Lovecraft's final word on contact. Not confrontation, not battle, contact. One glimpse through the trapezohedron ends Blake, not in flames, but in comprehension. The haunter is only a voice in the dream. The dreamer remains unseen. And yet, everything begins and ends there. Azathoth is not present, but it is the condition under which the story operates. This story reinforces a pattern. Azathoth never enters the narrative, yet it defines its perimeter. Characters do not meet it. They approach its edges. The result is always the same. Language fails, sanity fractures, and structure dissolves. In the next and final subsection of this part, we'll examine how later writers and collaborators expanded, and sometimes misunderstood, Azathoth, transforming it into forms Lovecraft himself never intended. After Lovecraft's death in 1937, the mythos did not die with him, but it did begin to mutate. Writers like August Derleth, Clark Ashton, Smith, Robert Bloch, and later Ramsey Campbell and Thomas Ligotti took up the mantle of cosmic horror. Some expanded Lovecraft's vision with care. Others, notably Derleth, reinterpreted it through more familiar theological frameworks. Nowhere is this more evident than in the posthumous handling of Azathoth. What had once been the symbol of radical unknowability began, in some versions, to resemble a god in the traditional sense. Evil, purposeful, and categorically bad. This marks a subtle but crucial distortion. August Derleth, Lovecraft's literary executor and chief mythos organizer, restructured the pantheon into a dualistic model. elder gods versus Du's great old ones. In Derleth's system, Azathoth becomes a force of elemental evil, associated with fire, chaos, and destruction. He positioned Azathoth as the leader of the great old ones, locked in eternal opposition with benevolent elder gods. But Lovecraft never framed his deities in moral terms. Azathoth was not evil. It was indifferent. By casting it as malevolent, Derleth transformed a symbol of metaphysical collapse into a more manageable threat, something the human mind could name, oppose, even narrate. This reframing contradicts Lovecraft's method. The horror of Azathoth was never its danger, but its incoherence. It could not be stopped because it never started. It had no will, no plan, no direction. To oppose it was to misunderstand it entirely. Derleth's system introduced structure into a mythos that was designed to destroy structure. He turned myth into theology, stripping away the cosmic nihilism that made Azathoth terrifying in the first place. Other writers responded differently. Clark Ashton Smith, a contemporary and friend of Lovecraft, retained the poetic ambiguity of the mythos. While he did not focus on Azathoth directly, his tales like the Dark Eidolon and the Devotee of Evil echo the theme of impersonal cosmic forces destroying human constructs. Smith understood that horror did not come from evil, but from scale mismatch, from minds confronting realities too vast to assimilate. Later authors like Ramsey Campbell introduced Azathoth in more grounded settings. In stories like The Inhabitant of the Lake, Campbell situates mythos elements in contemporary Britain, exploring how ancient forces might persist unnoticed in the modern world. Azathoth appears as background radiation, never confronted directly, but always implied as the unreachable center. Campbell restored a measure of Lovecraftian restraint, favoring mood over mechanics. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Thomas Ligotti elevated the conceptual horror of Azathoth into explicit philosophical territory. Though he rarely names Lovecraft's gods, his entire body of work builds on Azathoth's core implication that consciousness is a tragic accident. In essays like The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, Ligotti frames cosmic horror as metaphysical pessimism. Azathoth becomes not a creature, but a metaphor for the blind, indifferent processes that gave rise to human awareness. What if nothing exists for a reason? Ligotti asks. Azathoth is the answer that doesn't answer. Modern adaptations, particularly in games like Call of Cthulhu, Arkham Horror, and Elden Ring, often struggle with Azathoth. Game mechanics require rules, outcomes, and resolutions, but Azathoth resists all of these. In some cases, it is reduced to a final boss, an endgame threat whose arrival signifies defeat. This is a reversal of Lovecraft's intent. Azathoth's horror lay in its narrative unreachability. To give it hit points, an attack animation, or lore entries is to force a mask over the unmasked. Yet even these failures are instructive. They demonstrate how deeply modern media craves coherence and how resistant Azathoth remains. We must pause here. Every adaptation of Azathoth must grapple with the same tension. How do you represent the unrepresentable? Derleth solved this by changing it. Ligotti answered by never showing it. Games simplify it. But Lovecraft's own strategy remains the most effective. Describe everything around Azathoth and let its absence do the damage. In tracing Azathoth's literary afterlife, we see more than reinterpretation. We see a struggle to contain the implications of the idea itself. Some tame it, some deepen it. All respond to the original provocation, that the heart of reality might not be purpose, love, or reason, but a blind dream, humming meaninglessly in the dark. In the next section, we leave literature and turn to culture. How has Azathoth escaped the page and entered urban legend, subculture, and psychological theory? What happens when a god that dreams reality begins to haunt waking life? Long after Lovecraft's death, Azathoth began appearing in places he never imagined. Obscure forums, online archives, audio hoaxes, and pseudo-scientific conspiracy theories. These sightings were not of the deity itself. Azathoth does not lend itself to visible form, but of patterns, names, and fragments that suggest something real beneath the fiction. As with all great mythic figures, the boundary between story and belief has started to blur. Azathoth, by design, infects consensus reality, not as a presence, but as a doubt. In fringe internet communities, Azathoth is often discussed not as a literary invention, but as a true name, encoded in forbidden mathematics or deep space anomalies. In 2014, a widely circulated creepypasta claimed that a deep space microphone had captured a low-frequency oscillation at the galactic center. 3 repeating tones, spaced like a flute. The pattern was dubbed the blind sound. A digital spectrogram of the noise, though unverifiable, was shared across multiple forums with the caption, "He dreams still." No proof followed. None was needed. The power lay in the gesture towards something beyond verification. Similarly, in a series of coordinated 2017 Reddit threads titled Wake Protocol, anonymous users claimed that Azathoth was not a being, but an event encoded in human neurology. According to this narrative, sleep paralysis, intrusive thoughts, and specific patterns in schizophrenia represented the human mind coming into resonance with Azathoth's dream structure. Some posts claimed that sensory deprivation could induce Azathothian episodes, visions of collapsing geometry, persistent flute tones, and feelings of conceptual gravity. These accounts often ended abruptly, as if silenced. Most were deleted. What remains are screenshots, fragments, and dead links, enough to invite belief, or at least curiosity. Beyond the internet, Azathoth has entered a new kind of folklore, urban legends that treat fiction as a carrier of forbidden signals. College students speak of the one name you don't say during a sleep study. Occult YouTubers link Azathoth to numerological patterns in CERN experiments. Some hoaxes tie the deity to real astronomical objects. SGR-AAS, the black hole at the center of our galaxy, is sometimes reinterpreted as Azathoth's physical location. The name becomes a kind of placeholder for anything terrifyingly central and incomprehensible. Azathoth is less a thing and more a shape you're warned not to look at directly. What makes these stories compelling isn't belief in the literal existence of Azathoth. It's the feeling that the idea should not exist, and yet it does. The hoaxes gain traction not because people think they're true, but because part of them wants it to be. In an era saturated with conspiracy, simulation theory, and digital unreality, Azathoth fits too well. He doesn't contradict modern fears, he expresses them. If reality is a simulation, what happens when it glitches? If consciousness is a fluke, what dreams us? Azathoth does not answer. He looms. We must pause here. Myth thrives where explanation fails. In the spaces left by science, politics, and philosophy, ancient patterns return, this time wearing digital masks. Azathoth persists because it fulfills an emotional paradox. The fear that everything is meaningless, combined with the fear that something is behind it all, and that it is asleep, unthinking, and wholly indifferent. In this way, hoaxes are not detritus. They are folk processing mechanisms for a world that feels increasingly unstable. The myth of Azathoth continues to evolve, not through direct belief, but through repetition, remixing, and rumor. It circulates like a virus of the real, fiction infecting perception, until the two blur. We'll now turn from informal hoaxes to deliberate adaptation. What happens when Azathoth is reimagined in games, film, and music? Can something defined by incoherence survive in media that requires form? Azathoth was never meant to be seen, yet modern media, bound by visual and narrative constraints, keeps trying. The results vary, from ambient suggestion to literal depiction, but the pattern remains. Azathoth resists representation. Its core attributes, formlessness, indifference, epistemic collapse, do not translate easily into structured media. Still, artists, developers, and filmmakers continue to circle the idea, sensing in it a uniquely modern fear. Not that something will come, but that something already rules, and we can't understand it. In film, Azathoth rarely appears by name, but its conceptual presence permeates works like Annihilation, 2018, The Fountain, 2006, and Event Horizon, 1997. Each features a force that dissolves identity, corrupts language, and erases causality. In Annihilation, the alien presence within the shimmer duplicates and mutates life without intent. It doesn't attack, it responds. This reflects Azathoth's key trait, action without agency. Similarly, Event Horizon evokes the terror of exposure to a dimension governed by unfamiliar laws. The horror lies not in what is seen, but in the realization that nothing seen can be explained. These films do not show Azathoth, but they embody its logic. Video games face a different challenge. Interactivity requires clarity, rules, objectives, feedback. Yet several games attempt to approximate Azathoth by creating conditions of destabilization. In Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth, 2005, Azathoth is referenced in hidden lore, treated as a being whose awakening would instantly erase reality. In Bloodborne, 2015, though not explicitly Lovecraftian, the Great Ones echo Azathoth's structure. Unknowable forces that influence human minds through dreams, pregnancy, and memory loss. The final bosses are not triumphs of evil. They are thresholds into madness. Players do not defeat these entities. They cross into states of post-human incomprehension. Board games and RPGs attempt more literal adaptations. Arkham Horror, Fantasy Flight Games, includes Azathoth as an ancient one that ends the game immediately if awakened. In Eldritch, Horror, Azathoth's awakening triggers the destruction of the universe. These representations are necessarily simplified. Azathoth becomes a mechanical consequence, something with health points, strategies, and victory conditions. While effective for gameplay, this risks reducing a symbol of metaphysical disorder to a final boss. Yet even here, something interesting happens. Azathoth's presence warps the game's tone. Players rarely treat it as a monster. They treat it as a deadline, a cosmic inevitability. That mood aligns, if not the mechanics. We must pause here. When Azathoth enters structured media, it forces a choice: depict or suggest. Depiction tends to fail because form defeats its function. Suggestion, through atmosphere, decay, repetition, and dissonance, gets closer. This is especially true in music. Ambient and dark drone artists have used Azathoth as a conceptual anchor, not a subject. Works by Lustmord, Atrium Carcery, and Northond evoke the monotonous piping of Azathoth's court through low-frequency drones, dissonant loops, and non-rhythmic structures. The goal is not melody, but immersion in non-pattern. One 2012 composition titled Azathoth Sleeps contains no change for 20 minutes, only vibrating pressure. It doesn't entertain. It dismantles listening. Azathoth thrives in these edge cases, where form is pushed toward disintegration. It appears when narratives fracture, when visuals blur, when gameplay mechanics offer no salvation, when music offers no resolution. This is where adaptation becomes more than homage. It becomes translation, not a depiction of Azathoth, but a demonstration of what it does to systems. Its persistence across media suggests something deeper than aesthetic influence. Azathoth is not popular because it's dramatic. It endures because it reflects an unspoken anxiety that the foundations of reality, rules, goals, stories, may be nothing but dream noise from something that cannot wake. In the next section, we examine how this figure moves beyond art into academic discourse and subcultural identity. When scholars, occultists, and theorists invoke Azathoth, what are they actually doing? And what does that say about us? Azathoth has moved beyond fiction, not just into games and stories, but into intellectual and subcultural frameworks that attempt to engage with its implications seriously. These appropriations, while diverse, share a central question. What do we do with an idea that defies meaning? Scholars, occultists, philosophers, and online subcultures have each tried to answer, not by taming Azathoth, but by incorporating it into systems that acknowledge its unassimilable nature. In certain corners of chaos magic, Azathoth is invoked not as a literal deity, but as a symbolic void. Practitioners treat it as a tool for ritual ego death, an emblem of formlessness to break the illusion of identity. Unlike traditional deities invoked for guidance or power, Azathoth represents the loss of coherence, the collapse of duality. Rituals are designed not to communicate, but to dissolve. To gaze upon the face of Azathoth is to remember you have no face, wrote one anonymous grimoire fragment circulated online in 2009. Here, Azathoth functions as a metaphysical solvent, removing form, category, self, not evil, not benevolent, just unfiltered becoming. Philosophers, particularly those interested in nihilism and pessimism, have likewise found use for Azathoth. Eugene Thacker, in the Dust of This Planet, 2011, references Lovecraftian horror as the unthinkable thought of the world without us. Though he doesn't name Azathoth specifically, the concept aligns perfectly. Azathoth is the personification of the world without us, a blind mechanism with no observer, no value, no intent. In Ray Brassier's Nihil Unbound, 2007, cosmic nihilism is explored as a consequence of scientific realism, the idea that understanding the universe ultimately leads to the collapse of anthropocentric meaning. Azathoth, though fictional, becomes a fitting metaphor for this philosophical position. It is not a force that opposes humanity. It is a reality that excludes it. Academia has also adopted Azathoth as a figure of conceptual negation. Literary theorists use it to model texts that erase meaning as they construct it. Post-structuralist anti-signifiers that point to the failure of language itself. In this framework, Azathoth is not a character, but a textual function, the moment at which narrative turns against itself. A 2015 paper from the journal Textual Practice described Azathoth as a gravitational absence in the semiotic field, comparing its function to Derrida's difference pushed to the point of incoherence. Such appropriations don't trivialize the myth, they demonstrate its intellectual utility. Azathoth becomes usable horror. Meanwhile, internet subcultures adopt Azathoth for identity. On forums like Reddit's, Are abyss philosophy or Discord servers devoted to antinatalist or cosmic horror discourse? Users use Azathoth not as theology, but as a shorthand for total detachment. All Hail Azathoth is not a prayer. It's a meme ritual, a way of acknowledging despair without collapsing into it. For many, Azathoth expresses a shared recognition. That meaning may be fictional, but the need for symbols remains. Ironically, a god of mindless chaos becomes a stabilizing symbol for those who no longer believe in stability. We must pause here. These appropriations all reflect the same human impulse, to name the unnameable. By placing Azathoth in systems, ritual, theory, meme, we do not domesticate it. We interface with it. We treat the void not as a villain, but as a context. What makes Azathoth powerful outside fiction is not its lore, but its utility. It gives shape to the feeling that reality is deeper, darker, and less coherent than it appears. As we approach the end, we must ask, what does it mean to live with Azathoth? Not in fear of its awakening, but in acknowledgement that its dream may be the only thing we've ever known. The final section considers this question, not to resolve it, but to let it echo. If Azathoth endures, it is not because people believe in it, but because they can't stop thinking with it. The figure of the blind idiot god persists as a psychological and philosophical device, not a deity. It gives form to unformable fears, that consciousness is accidental, that reality is unstable, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, stands behind the veil. This is the deeper horror Lovecraft engineered, not monstrous presence, but the absence of foundation. Psychologically, Azathoth represents a condition more than a threat. It is not something outside the self, but the unspoken possibility within it, that the mind, far from being the master of reality, is a side effect of something vast, asleep and unaware. In modern mental health discourse, especially around dissociation and derealization, parallels to Azathoth appear unbidden. The loss of agency, the sense of unreality, the suspicion that the world isn't quite real mirror Lovecraft's cosmology precisely. The individual does not go mad from chaos. They recognize it. In philosophy, Azathoth remains relevant wherever the idea of foundational meaning is questioned. In existentialism, Camus calls the universe unreasonable, a phrase that could describe Azathoth perfectly. But where Camus seeks rebellion, Lovecraft's vision offers no position from which to rebel. In postmodernism, where systems of truth are seen as constructs, Azathoth becomes the ultimate symbol of non-system. Not an alternative structure, but the place where all structures fail. The god never acts, speaks, or judges. It precedes all of that. It is meaningless, utterly, essentially, and thus invulnerable to critique. For some, this void is unbearable, but for others, it becomes a strange form of freedom. If Azathoth is real, in the metaphorical sense, then no moral law, no cosmic purpose, no final revelation can claim universality. This realization, far from paralyzing, can be clarifying. In a world without ultimate meaning, the search for meaning becomes the only meaning left. Azathoth marks the boundary of thought. What comes after is not horror, but decision. We must pause here. In almost every religion, the divine watches. It listens, judges, responds. Azathoth does none of these. It dreams, not of us, not even of itself. And yet, we exist within that dream. The implications are twofold. First, we are accidents. Second, we are still here. To be dreamed by something that cannot wake is terrifying. But it also means that, for now, the dream holds. Azathoth, then, is not the end of story. but the boundary of narrative. It is what you find when no further metaphor will do. It is not death. It is not evil. It is not even chaos in the traditional sense. It is the collapse of reference itself. And yet, we continue to speak its name, write its myth, turn toward its presence with questions we know cannot be answered. So we end where we began. If Azathoth wakes up, it's not what you've been told. It is not apocalypse, but recognition. Not fire, but silence. Not an ending, but the moment you realize there was never a beginning. And yet, you're still here.